Hello and welcome to today's webinar, a panel discussion on effectively managing data, information risk, and compliance in today's turbulent healthcare ecosystem. I'm Carol Flagg of Answers Media Network and HealthcareNOW Radio. Thanks for joining us on our continuing series of events with eFax Corporate. This event is brought to you by eFax Corporate, which is a brand of J2 Cloud Services. J2 is an award-winning leading provider of internet services through its two divisions, its Business Cloud Services and Digital Media. And as of December 31st, 2019, has achieved 24 consecutive fiscal years of revenue growth. Please visit their website for more information. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator and our panelists for today's event. Matt Fisher is a leading healthcare attorney and partner in the law firm of Mirick O'Connell. Matt's expertise includes advising clients on regulatory, privacy, security, fraud, abuse, and compliance issues. And he works with a variety of provider organizations across the healthcare industry. Matt also advises digital health and health IT companies from startups to mature companies. Matt is also the host of Healthcare Jure, one of our most popular shows on our HealthcareNOW radio station. Jeffrey Sullivan is the Chief Technology Officer for J2 Cloud Services with over 25 years of experience in the technology space. His unique background blends deep technical knowledge with creative and business expertise to lead companies on both strategic and tactical levels. He is a passionate advocate of the use of technology to drive growth and innovation. And over his career, he has continuously demonstrated the value of agility in today's high-growth companies, where the ability to deliver value incrementally and to change priorities often is a major competitive edge. Lee Barrett is a CEO and Executive Director of EHNAC, a federally recognized standards development organization. Lee is a national speaker and author who has worked for 3 decades on key initiatives laying the foundation for health IT. He was appointed by Dr. Donald Rucker, the National Coordinator of the ONC, to the Executive Steering Committee for the ONC Payer Plus Provider Fast Fire Task Force. He also co-chairs the Fast Testing and Certification Tiger Team and Sequoia Project Interoperability Matters Leadership Council. He is a member of the HSS Cybersecurity Task Force and chair of the National Trust Network Data Sharing and Cybersecurity Task Force as well. And rounding out our panel today is Michael Parisi, the Vice President of Assurance Strategy and Community Development for HITRUST. Founded in 2007, HITRUST has championed programs that safeguard sensitive information and manage information risk for organizations across the globe. He has led over 500 controls-related engagement, primarily in the healthcare and financial services industries. He has extensive experience with third-party assurance reporting and is an active member of ICACA and IAPP. And now I'll turn the discussion over to our moderator and our panelists.
Right, well, Carol, thank you for the introduction, and Jeff, Lee, and Michael, welcome to the discussion today. I'm sure we have a lot of ground to cover, given, I think a small number of challenges would be short selling it on purpose that have arisen throughout the course of the pandemic. But I think before we really get kind of started with the discussion, I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to give a little bit of an opening, maybe give a little bit more of a background on what each of your particular focuses are, and provide the foundation for our upcoming discussion. Based on my view, I'm going to go left to right, and that means Jeff, you're up first.
Hi, I'm Jeff Sullivan. I'm Chief Technology Officer for J2 Cloud Services, in charge of our cloud fax and interoperability offerings. J2, and especially my division, is focused on healthcare as one of our major industries, and healthcare interoperability is one of our main areas of focus. My responsibilities span the gamut from technology to product management, product development, and my focus really is on helping to broker the path forward in healthcare to adoption of better and more effective technologies to enhance patient care.
Hi, and Lee.
Hello, everybody. I'm Lee Barrett, Executive Director and CEO for EHNAC. We're a 25-year young accreditation organization focused only on healthcare accreditation, with major focus really around privacy and security. And we partnered with HITRUST several years ago as far as our privacy and security, as well as providing stakeholder-specific criteria on healthcare. We've focused on developing health data exchange accreditation programs, as well as interoperability, as Jeff was talking about, where we developed our Trusted Network Accreditation Program a couple of years ago with a consortium of the industry, focused on aligning with TEFCA as well as 21st Century Cures. And we're continuing to focus on really the interoperability side of the spectrum. We're very involved in a lot of the interoperability initiatives that are going on in relation to developing of the common agreement, TEFCA itself, as well as a lot of the cybersecurity specific aspects here. So we're designated federally as a standards development organization, so our process is very transparent and open to the industry as well. And so we're looking forward to this discussion.
Right, thank you, and Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So Michael Parisi, Vice President of Strategy and Community Development here at HITRUST. So my role is focused on evaluating our current programs and figuring out how we can enhance them to make them better for organizations that are leveraging them, in addition to determining what new programs we should be standing up in order to address common security and privacy challenges. And to echo what Lee was indicating, Lee and EHNAC has been a longtime partner of ours in that mission.
Yeah, so kind of based on the introduction that all of you just gave, it's you all have a very solid grounding in security concerns and the workings of data. So kind of now turning to the main part of our discussion, kind of where I'd like to start is kind of the rise or maybe the increased frequency of attacks that have been observed throughout the course of the COVID-19 pandemic so far, and wanted to dive into what each of you might see as the basis for that happening, and kind of why do we think those attacks have been on the rise? So Lee, would you like to kick us off on this part of the discussion?
Sure, Matt. This is a very interesting one in that I think that, as both Jeff and Michael will attest, I think the fact that we have all been focused, and we were all talking before we started here, the fact that we've all been operating, and as well as all of probably you as well that are listening in, many of you are really focusing on really working from home. So the whole virtual aspect of this and we've all been doing this since like February, since COVID actually became really front and center. So if you look at it, I think that the issue is all of our organizations have focused on how we're looking to address COVID-19, and we've all had to make significant changes in policies, procedures, controls, how we're doing. For us, we've also had to change. We used to be doing really on-site visits and assessments. And I think Michael's having the same issue with HITRUST. All of the assessors or practitioners are having to do all of this virtually now. So, I think that the focus that we've all spent around COVID and what we've needed to do organizationally, how we're addressing and working with customers, I think that, as we've been using Zoom and whether or not it's GoToMeeting, whatever, we've all been focusing on how we address COVID and how we look to continue to maintain business. So if you look at that and you look at the amount of effort that has gone on for all of us, there's been less emphasis then on probably some of the cyber infrastructure and the cyber hygiene that we've all were very focused on prior to COVID-19 occurring. And so, I think that the issue is that there's just been less emphasis, less rigor around it, even though a lot of organizations still spend significant dollars, time, energy, and focus on cyber and cyber attacks. I do think that whether you look at provider organizations or you look at other stakeholders, there's probably been a relaxation in some of the rigor that's necessary. when you look at, OCR, for example, the Office for Civil Rights, what they did with COVID-19 as well, they came up with a number of what I would call relaxed guidelines for the industry, especially around things like telehealth. They came out with a bulletin in February on COVID-19, their notification of enforcement discretion on telehealth, guidance on disclosures to law enforcement and other first responders and public health authorities, notification of enforcement discretion on uses and disclosures of protected health information by business associates for public health and health oversight activities. These are just some of the aspects that even OCR has done. I do think, and certainly we were talking about telehealth, and Matt, we were talking about the fact your wife is in fact a physician and how telehealth has become kind of front and center here. I think that what OCR did in relaxing some of that was important. At least as people are going through and addressing COVID-19 with patients, et cetera, in the hospital environments. I do think that one of the things that we've also seen is a major increase by cyber criminals is with the fact that we are now moving forward very rapidly with trying to develop a new vaccine to address COVID-19 as well. We're seeing a lot of cyber criminals, whether or not it's from other countries, et cetera, that are trying to attack biopharmas in relation to trying to get intellectual property IP from those in relation to these vaccine developments. So we're seeing a significant amount of impact and increase there as well. So, all of these, I think, are just indications as we've been focusing as an industry around COVID-19 and how we look to continue business. And so I think the impacts, I think with OCR, with certainly lessening some of their fines and their enforcement, the impacts on cyber criminals going after biopharmas, we're just seeing this. So I would say to everyone that the issue on focusing and continuing to focus on cyber hygiene and not letting the foot off the pedal here is extremely critical because cyber criminals are taking advantage of it, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, and Lee, there is a lot to unpack with, all the different areas that you just covered. But, let's kind of dive into the not taking the foot off the cyber hygiene pedal piece that you went to last. And, Michael, I'd like to have you dive into that a little bit more, because I think that would probably aligns with a lot of what you focus on from the certification perspective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Lee indicated a number of the challenges that we've been having, as an independent certification body. We've needed to adjust our assurance program with obviously the challenges that COVID has brought to a number of organizations. So things like on-site audits, as Lee mentioned, can't happen right now, right? So how do we make sure that we adjust our assurance program in such a way that organizations can, still execute the necessary testing that needs to be done in order to support an assurance-related report. But at the same time, how do we make sure we're still giving the appropriate level of assurances to those stakeholders? So we've done a number of things. For example, we've had to create new types of assessments or bridge assurances over a period of time, as organizations have not had the ability to execute a full assessment. So looking at that from a methodology perspective and taking a risk-based approach, basically, to understand, how long we can extend assurances relative to security and privacy, while still performing a minimum necessary level of testing, if you will, in order to provide those assurances. In addition to that, and I think Lee alluded to this, our Achilles heel is exposed, right? And regardless of what industry you're talking about right now, we are focused on the greatest risk that we could ever think of, which is the loss of human life. And people on the front lines, and Matt, you know this, as you indicated, with your wife actually being directly on the front lines. We need to deliver care, and we need to deliver it quickly. And unfortunately, with all the distractions that we have in our lives right now, not only personally, but professionally, there are some things that are going to go by the wayside. And, that is, unfortunately, privacy and security related items. And Lee even mentioned, our federal regulators are acknowledging that, which, there's pluses and minuses to that. It helps us focus on the quote unquote more important things. But, in instances where we are letting, let's say, new risks in the door, because we're not in a position to perform appropriate level of security and privacy diligence, that's what I'm worried about, right? What's going to happen 6, 9, 12 months down the line, now that we've onboarded all these new third parties, for example, and business stakeholders. What have we exposed ourselves to? We don't even know, unfortunately. So that's what we're focused on, is how do we help organizations address that risk, and even take that on in some instances to help them manage the inherent risk that they're letting into their organization.
Michael and Lee, with the background that you kind of just gave of the challenges on being the kind of the outside review style organization, Jeff, I'm very interested to hear from you in terms of actually being one of the organizations that maybe is seeking the certification and an organization that's actually delivering a service. What challenges have you seen, and how has that been impacting operations?
So thank you, Matt. We are a HITRUST certified organization. We have 4 different HITRUST certified products in our product suite, and I think we have the good fortune of being in our off-year recert. So it's not the full recert, it's the off-year. So I think that we are actually going through the process of recertification on that right now. And to Michael's point, the auditors are all having to work remotely. Our entire company is remote. We also go through PCI certification, and again, the certification there is being done remotely. And I think that offers slightly reduced challenges when you're in a recertification posture than when you're in an initial certification posture. But I think in both cases, there is a reduced fidelity there. For example, checking the physical components of security has to be done by video and photo instead of being able to do physical inspections. These are some challenges. Obviously, the certification piece of it is exactly as much as the effort you put into it. And from our perspective, the intention here is that we let people understand that because we are delivering a service, these certifications are embodiments of our preparedness and our security protection posture. And so we're taking extra steps to be as vigilant as we possibly can be. Lee had alluded to, look, we are working largely remotely. As you said, Matt, all of us, the panelists on this and yourself, are working largely from home these days, or in a largely distributed organization. And that does introduce a lot of extra inherent risk that we have to deal with. And we are putting a lot of extra processes in place to be able to manage that effectively. But from our perspective, being sure to service our customers is key, and being able to manage the increased risk inherent in a suddenly and unexpectedly distributed workforce has been a very large chunk of what we had to do. Kind of the very first thing was just that initial, oh my gosh, all of a sudden we all have to be working remotely. How do we enable that? And then the fast follow on that was, how do we make sure that the enablement that we did in a hurry is now as secure and as effective as possible?
Yeah, and now that a couple of you have gone into the work from home issue, which I definitely agree is something that I suspect all of our organizations and organizations that our listeners work at, the capability was there, but there was never the expectation that you'd have up to 100% of your workforce on it and utilizing it. So Jeff, let's lead off with you, because you were starting to get into it, but would you be able to describe in a little bit more detail kind of what work was required from a privacy and security standpoint as you saw that immediate ramp up? Because it was basically like a flip of a switch. You had people one day in the office, the next day basically locked out of it and forced to be at home. So, how were you able to work around those challenges?
Sure. So, obviously, the first thing is just enablement, and as you say, some organizations are in a better position to enable that at the beginning. Some already have a partial, or in some fairly rare cases, completely distributed workforce. We were in a position where we were largely in office, but we had personally had the good fortune that we had just done a headquarters move. So our headquarters office had an experience about a month prior in January of having a large chunk of our office work from home while we did the final move of the offices. And so we were we'd done this trial run for COVID unbeknownst to us. But every organization is suddenly faced with now either many, most, or all of their workforce is working in a distributed and remote manner. Look, it's understandable in a time like this that people are going to be distracted. This is the quintessential, perhaps, once in a lifetime level of distraction that we're going to be facing. Hopefully, this is a once in a lifetime type of a thing that we face here. The challenge is we cannot afford in these critical businesses to relax our vigilance at this time, because so many other things are out of normal, and it's so easy to understand why we would. The challenge is that this is exactly when cyber criminals, fraudulent activity is at its height, because they really look for moments where you have taken your eye off the ball, as Lee put it, or where you are otherwise distracted, because that's where weaknesses tend to lurk. So the focus on the security posture now is more important than it's ever been, simply because we are in a much more vulnerable and in a much heightened risk environment than we've ever been before. One of the things that we relied on, and that I think all businesses need to think about and rely on, is their automated systems that help them keep their security posture vigilant, even in this world of distractions, right? More and more people are distributed, people are working from home. You've got to have a strong set of tools that allow you to maintain your posture, push that out to your distributed equipment. For example, all of the standard cybersecurity practices, company issued equipment, being encrypted on device, having remote monitoring, fraud protection, malware protection, intrusion detection, all of these things that enable the devices to be safe, that enable that now distributed network of electronically protected information, is being able to be as secure as if it were in office. Things like automated systems that can allow your HCO to leverage reduced staffing that you may be in. If you had to do furloughs, a lot of the HCOs have had to do some furloughs for non-essential personnel. My son works in an ICU, and a lot of his friends and coworkers have been furloughed because they are in more elective or just less critical parts of the organization. So the hospital is running on a reduced staff, and it's crazy to think about HCOs running in reduced staff situations in a time when we're in a healthcare crisis. But there's a lot of the parts of the healthcare community as a whole that are actually very down right now. I mean, nobody is going in for a dentist appointment in many locations because the priorities are somewhat different. So you've got reduced personnel, and your automated tooling can help with that. And look, this is best practice anyway, right? Automated security is always more effective than purely manual security, because people forget, people get distracted, people have to deal with childcare in their home that they haven't had to deal with before because they were in the office. All of these reasons are why automation and security protocols are in place, so that you don't get distracted, so that you don't miss your key actions. I think one of the things that's really important for organizations, is something that we focus very heavily on as we made that transition to full remote, is reminding everybody about all of the things that and are trained on every year around your security practices. Things like phishing and social engineering, making sure that all of your devices, especially if your organization has a BYOD policy, all of them have these security tools and policies enabled and enforced. But then reminding people, look, if you're in a home environment now, you may have EPHI on your screen. You have to make sure that, number one, your automation is locking your screen when you're in, idle for a certain period of time. But you also have to remember, I may have other people walking past this screen, and I need to be sensitive to that. I may have, and this is fortunately not as big a deal, visitors coming into my home that may have access to that EPHI if I'm not treating it with the utmost care. And a lot of that is the human factor, right? I think we're always going to be most vulnerable to cybercrime along that human vector, and training your people to understand what security looks like in a home environment and how it may be different from how it looks in a work environment was a key part for us. So we did an early refresh of all of our training with people just to remind them of all the things that they need to do. And of course, we made sure that all of our automated policies were pushed out. We did not expand our BYOD policy as part of this. We did make sure that everybody got issued either devices they could take with them or devices that were inherently mobile, laptops and whatnot, that had all of our latest security software on it and that had all of our automation and practices pushed by policy onto it. So very focused on automation to make sure that that natural human tendency to be inattentive is being protected against.
And that was a number of, I think, very helpful factors to be able to consider. But I'd like to hear from Lee and Michael as well in terms of considerations from work from home and becoming more primarily remote. So Lee, let's go to you first, and then we'll go to Michael.
I think Jeff did a great job, and I think that what J2 is doing is a great model for the industry. I mean, the fact, Jeff, when you talk about, providing the equipment, setting up the standards, I mean, what you just laid out to me is the type of high level of cyber hygiene that you want to have in an organization. That's the best you can possibly do, I think, to try to manage a virtual workforce. I think the other point that you made, which is also very important, is the fact that the training aspect, keeping training high, keeping the whole issue of vigilance high with your staff is another important hygiene aspect at this point in time. With everything else, all the distractions that people are dealing with, it can be lost. So continuing to focus there. I think the other thing is that you said in your particular environment, but again, in many they're not. In what you're doing at J2, you're pushing out, for example, updates for software, etc. In many organizations, that's not done. It's really up to the individual. It may not be pushed out. They need to actually physically go on and put in an update, etc. All of that, to me, are part of the risk, some of the risk vectors that are out there. If somebody is not, downloading a new version of software that's got a security patch in it from Microsoft or someplace else, that's a risk. The whole issue, the other thing is, to me, another big risk is phishing. To me, phishing is a major risk, and if you don't continue to keep staff aware of phishing risks, then they have a tendency with all of the email that they're getting these days to say, "Hey, geez, this looks real," and just clicking on it. It's interesting. I was just reading an article that came out about OCR today that warns hospitals of HIPAA compliance scams. They were talking about the fact that a non-existent Secretary of Compliance, HIPAA Compliance Division, is mailing postcards that ask privacy and security leaders to visit a fraudulent URL for the purpose of setting up a risk assessment. And people are doing it. So, I mean, the point is, it's the vigilance, it's the ongoing awareness, education, training that we can all do with all of the distractions, all of the focus that people are working on in a virtual environment. So some great points that Jeff made about what J2 is doing as an organization to maintain their highest level of cyber hygiene.
So, Michael, do you have thoughts you'd like to add into this discussion?
Yeah, and I think, Jeff nailed it when he talked about taking our eye off the ball, which is, naturally going to happen by being distracted as individuals, right? We're all people, and that's naturally going to happen. So I'm a story guy, so I'll tell two quick stories that I think will help to drive this home. I was talking to, a good friend of mine who was obviously working from home, as Jeff indicated that we all are. And he told me a story of how he was having a sensitive discussion with a customer. And his patio door happened to be open, and his wife was outside with his dog, right, sitting out on the patio, and he's having this long discussion. And his wife comes in after the phone call and says, "What are you doing? Like, I could hear everything that you were talking about. And by the way, our neighbor next door also heard your entire discussion." He didn't even think about that, right? So there's certain things in working in a different environment that we don't even think about, and we are exposing, data and also sensitive information, not on purpose naturally, but it's based off of the environment that we're working in. The other thing, I think, to Jeff's point, and when you're in an office, you know what the connected devices are. Of course, this is always listening. We know that, right? But when you're at home, there's a lot more things that are listening. Whether it's an Alexa, whether it be some other smart device within the home, there's a lot more things in that home environment that are listening that are more than likely not as protected as corporate assets. And that is a big challenge for a lot of organizations to focus on. In addition to that, I think, what Lee was talking about, I saw that article as well today, relative to the OCR, and in individuals, because they're so distracted, they are more than likely going to be victims of things like phishing attacks. Naturally, right? And Jeff mentioned that, and so did Lee. And that's just the environment that we're working in. So I think at the end of the day, the last story I have for you is investments in security and privacy programs. I was talking to a CISO of a hospital system last week, and they happen to be HITRUST certified, and I was saying, how are things going? I'm sure, funds are tight, initiatives are redirected. Are you going to continue down this path, trying to figure out how we could help? And he said, Mike, absolutely. Like, the only reason why we've been able to react and protect our organization in times like this is because we took security and privacy seriously. And we integrated it within the foundation of our organization. And if it wasn't for that framework and that diligence and those controls and the assurance that their assessor was able to provide them, we would not have been able to react to this situation. So that really drove it home. It was a different mindset where some organizations may say, well, the last thing that I'm going to do is spend time and resources on trying to get, say, a certification, or I'm going to press the pause button on security and privacy, where others, and I think Jeff alluded to this, the fact that you have made that investment and you continue to make that investment allows you to pivot and adapt when things like this happen. This is not the first, and it certainly won't be the last. There are other things that are going to happen that are unpredictable, and making sure you have those foundational components in place around security and privacy, not only internally, but certainly externally with your third parties, is super important.
The example of saying, emphasizing the fact that the investment in privacy and security has enabled the ability to pivot and, if at all possible, succeed in the current environment, I think is a great takeaway, because it's so often, the pushback against privacy and security is, oh, it's just going to cost us money. It's not going to give us anything back. But I think if you actually take a long-term view on it, Michael, as you just described, no, it does drive a return, and it does drive growth and success. So, hopefully most people will take that away and, use that as, support to increase, get more spend in the area if there's gaps or deficiencies, or to maintain current levels of effort. And I also like the example you gave of, devices are always listening. It's, I find that when I've been on calls with people, including yesterday, where, we're in the middle of a conversation, all of a sudden the person on the other line does a quick aside of Alexa, stop, or Siri, stop listening to me. So it's amazing. 2 years ago, you never would have even thought about that. Now they're everywhere. But something that all three of you were just mentioning were, the prevalence of phishing and the rise of phishing attacks. Lee, I know you gave the example of the postcard, which was, not what most people would probably think of as phishing, although I think that would still classify, even though it was paper-based, which is, kind of amazing that anyone would think to, or is actually having success on a paper-based one. But Lee, I think this also kind of goes back to something you were saying during your initial statement about the number of attacks that are going against some of the pharma companies who are helping on vaccine development, as well as I feel like it's still on a daily basis seeing reports from other organizations of successful phishing attacks. So do you have any examples of how those attacks are being run, or the particular types of data that they might be trying to get access to? And Lee, I'll have you kick us off on this part of the discussion.
So I think in many cases, the number of and types of phishing attacks, Matt, going back to your question, they're very creative these days. I would say that probably between Jeff, Mike, we've all seen every kind of phishing attack that possibly could happen. I mean, as I do training as well with various organizations, some of the provider organizations that I'm doing compliance for, I try to give them examples of the fact that you could get today, you see phishing emails from people that they're looking like somebody you absolutely know. It could be, looks like a family member's in trouble or whatever, needing information, needing money, and people are doing it. In fact, that's why we go through and have we tell organizations have a third-party entity do the testing for phishing emails. Jeff, I think you do that. You have a third party that's testing internally, and you want to see, where people are actually clicking on them. It is a very interesting point that in many organizations, the individuals that are clicking on these phishing emails, even though they may go through and they're highlighted that, hey, you shouldn't be, this is the type of email that you clicked on, you shouldn't be doing this is why. It's the same individuals, the percentage of individuals that are clicking on those emails again when there's another test. So the percentage is pretty high on these. But I will tell you that phishing emails have gotten extremely creative, and we see you also see a significant number of these phishing emails going to elderly people who are actually clicking on them as well. So, the impact of phishing is extremely high. And so the whole aspect around education, training, vigilance around it, and going through time after time, identifying these issues and trying to highlight them to people is the best we can look to do. And hopefully filtering as well. And I think, Jeff, you've got probably this filtering in your organization, trying to catch any of these that are coming in before they're actually getting to somebody's workstation. So that goes back to kind of the automation aspects, and the more we can look to build into, and we're seeing artificial intelligence, a lot of AI is also being deployed here in being able to determine a phishing scam versus and a phishing email versus something else. So there's a lot of really good work going on, but the risk is extremely high, especially when you start to look at hospitals and other types of environments in which they're seeing, ransomware attacks because somebody has clicked on a phishing email and taken over an environment. Michael, how many times have you seen that and heard that at HITRUST, where organizations have been completely taken over? And now you're looking at the issue in some of these environments, Matt, as well, where when they're taken over in a ransomware attack, we had a hospital in this area that was taken over, they were completely down for 10 days. 10 days. No one could get to make an appointment. No one could see a physician. No one could get have access to their electronic health record. I mean, completely down. That says that an organization needs to, again, the whole vigilance around making sure that they've got ongoing and up-to-date backups to be able to get back up. They have contingency planning so that they can immediately implement a contingency plan to mitigate the impact is extremely important. And it goes back to the rigor of having the controls, having the contingency planning in place, and all of that takes time, money, effort, and focus. So again, going back to what we were talking about, kind of the COVID-19 impact here on organizations, I think many organizations still have their eye on the ball and are focused on their cyber hygiene, and we applaud those organizations. But for those organizations that are focused on COVID-19 or other aspects and not as much vigilance around their privacy and security is an aspect not to let their foot off the pedal. Lastly, I do think the other thing that's changed, and then probably others have thoughts on this. I think the other thing that's changed over the past several years is the fact that privacy, security, and cyber security and hygiene is at the board level. Boards of directors are extremely involved and wanting to have, whether it's Jeff, you're probably having to make a report to your board on a quarterly basis, CIOs, CISOs are having to do so. So the boards are very concerned, and it's now at the board level. And so the fact that the boards of directors and senior leadership now take this very seriously, again, I think there's less of an opportunity to let the foot off the pedal for larger organizations than there are for smaller organizations. So I get concerned about provider offices. I get concerned about smaller entities within healthcare that may not have the vigilance or the control, and they're focused on so many other initiatives that vigilance and that rigor may be not there where it needs to be.
So, and Michael, what about your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you know what Lee alluded to. It's times like these that justify why we do what we do, right? So having that diligence in place is going to help us when events and things that are you know, unexpected happen within our organization. So back to the same theme we were talking about before, and some of the comments that Jeff had made. By making those event investments, it helps prepare our organization to address challenges like this, and it helps us to continue to operate. And you know, as Lee mentioned, you know, it helps us to address items that maybe, you know, are not as important before and are more important now with the distractions that we have in place. In addition to that, and Lee had alluded to this, you know, when you think about senior management, right, and the board, and you know, senior members within an organization, they're now asking questions that they never asked before, and they were not, you know, not knowledgeable to even ask those questions. Never mind understand the nature of the questions that they were asking. And a lot of those are focused on cybersecurity and privacy, rightfully so, right? I mean, they're seeing so many different regulations and enforcement actions that are in place. I think as a society, we are becoming smarter around what those risks are, or at least I hope we are, you know, as individuals and as organizations. And as a result, there's going to be more and more focus on that. And what I find very interesting, we've been talking a lot about the regulators, And I think Lee had mentioned this, you know, some of the announcements that have come out from OCR as the enforcement arm of HIPAA, you know, basically saying they're relaxing the enforcement of certain requirements as it relates to HIPAA. That's the enforcement. What's very interesting is that if you look at HIPAA as a standard, you know, it indicates that you must have an emergency mode operation. And so even HIPAA says, in the event of an emergency, define that however you like. I think we would all consider this an emergency right now, what we're living in. You must maintain those standards for a very good reason. And so, you know, I think as a society, many organizations are now going to look back and say, you know what, those corners that we cut and the investments that we did not make, we cannot be in that position again. We need to make sure we make those investments. And a great example, I know we're not using this platform today, is Zoom. You know, the CEO of Zoom actually lives about a half a mile from me. I was able to get coffee with him about 4 months ago after all the issues that they were going through, you know, and help him think through what they needed to do. And the discussion was, wow, wish I made those investments like 3 or 4 years ago, right? Because now I've exposed not only my organization, but so many individuals that are leveraging my solution. Great solution, great platform. Security and privacy was not a foundational component of that organization. And I think what we're all focused on is that the positives coming out of this is to use this as an example to say, this is why you make the investments in good security and privacy posture and hygiene, as Lee mentioned, and make sure you keep up with it because you never know what's going to come around the corner.
And picking up on that theme,
the other thing, Matt, I just wanted to mention that I think Michael had talked about before, which is another aspect I think that's very critical, that people may have a tendency not to have the rigor on, is the whole aspect around third-party assessment. Mm-hmm. I do think you know, even though they may keep their focus on their own organizations internally, which is absolutely critical, and the rigor there, but not letting their foot off the pedal on third-party assessments as well, and assuring that those third parties that are representing and performing a number of services, you know, whether or not it's in your organization or so many other organizations, keeping the rigor around assuring that third parties are meeting the level of privacy and security and your risk standards that you have within your organization is also a critical component of the vigilance that organizations need to maintain. So I just wanted to emphasize that point. I think that Mike, you had mentioned before, because that third-party assessment component is absolutely critical. And whether or not it's a large organization or a smaller organization that's doing work, assuring you got those business associate agreements and you've got the level of rigor with those third parties that are performing services for your organization.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. You know, when this started, we got a flood of inquiries from our customers. Hey, can you explain to me how you're ready for all of this? You know, what are you doing to maintain, you know, availability and maintain your posture? And, you know, are you going to be able to keep, you know, going during this? And we also reached out to our third-party, you know, vendors and providers and asked a similar thing. You know, you need to understand it's not just your organization, but all the other organizations upon which your organization depends, that they are in a similar position. You know, if you have a key vendor who is not holding a good security posture, you may have an exposure there that you're not aware of, even though you yourself are fairly buttoned down. So you're right, it's the entire network that you need to make sure maintains their vigilance, and you need to be aware of, even if you have to say, okay, this particular vendor wasn't ready, they needed to relax requirements, as some entire HCOs or certainly small practices may have ended up doing, know where you've taken a calculated risk or cut a corner so that you don't end up with blind spots.
Yeah, Matt, if I may round that out, agree with everything that Lee and Jeff have said. This is my soapbox when it comes to third-party risk management, but I'll keep it brief. you know, in today's day and age, there is a need to onboard third parties quicker than ever before, right? If you think about a hospital system, for example, Matt, you know this with your wife being on the front lines, you know, if we don't have enough ventilators, well, we're probably going to need to work with a new vendor to procure those and get them in the door. Same thing with protective equipment, right? And we can't spend 2 to 3 months doing a security and privacy diligence review. We need it now. So what organizations are unfortunately having to do, and I think Jeff alluded to this, is to say, yeah, we'll go back to that, right? Let's just get it in the door, and let's make sure we have the necessary supplies. And when this is all over, we'll go back and we'll revisit that third party. But as Lee indicated, and as I mentioned before, what have you let in the door? You don't know what you don't know. So you need to have some type of program in place that helps you to quickly vet third parties to at least understand the risk, even if you're making the business decision to accept the risk. You know, you got to at least understand what that profile is. And that's why one of the things that we have done is, you know, we have an integrated third-party risk management program that we've offered for free to qualified organizations during COVID, and it's still out there to say, look, don't take on this risk. Let us at least help you in working with our assessor partners like Lee to vet, you know, what that issue could be while you onboard those third parties. And super critical, right? Even in some instances, even more important than what we're doing within our own organization. And you know, Lee alluded to that, how important third parties are. I was having a discussion with GE Healthcare, you know, last week, and their number one concern right now, it's not their own organization, it's all of the suppliers, right? Are they able to continue to operate? When you think about where they get these pieces and parts from to even build medical devices, they're from all over the world. Major suppliers in Brazil, their factory that has a critical part or component is shut down because everyone's infected with COVID. They can't even procure or get the pieces they need to build the devices to get them to the front lines. So third parties is super important, and I would argue even more important now than it ever has been.
Yeah, no, and you all raise a very important point in terms of, you know, the third parties and the third party assessments. Although I guess I would kind of pose a challenge. You know, I agree that, you know, rushing through the process creates unnecessary risk. But, you know, having been on both sides of the process, depending on which clients I might be working with, that 3 to 4 month lead time that some feel is, you know, allows that really thorough vetting, even in the best of times, delays the use of a new system or a new resource. You know, so you know, I'd almost say and take what you were saying, Michael, as, you know, what as a challenge of how can we, you know, how can everybody work together to make the process more efficient at all times? Because, you know, if you say you're in a hospital and you've got one department saying, I need this, you know, this tool is going to be really helpful for us in providing a service, and then all of a sudden they're told, okay, well, you'll have it in 4 months. No one's really satisfied with that response. And, you know, it seems like you don't need that much time to also get a good picture of that third party you might be working with. It seems like there is a real opportunity for improving efficiency and streamlining the process, and, you know, as I said, making it hopefully better for everybody. But kind of what I'd like to do now is, you know, as we're starting to really come close to the end of the hour, you know, allow each of you to be able to do some concluding thoughts. And you know, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in reverse order from how we let it off. So Michael, you'll be up first, and then it'll go to Lee and then Jeff. But what I'd like to do is, you know, have each of you, to the extent that it's possible, given how murky things probably are right now, but you know, maybe look into a crystal ball and, you know, identify what do you think we're going to be looking at, you know, in 6, 9, or 12 months down the road. So Michael, let's go to you first.
Yeah, and I alluded to this before in this discussion, what I think we're going to be looking at is really three different things. One, we have allowed a number of vulnerabilities and risks into our organizations. Again, maybe no fault of our own, right? Having to move quickly, but I think we're going to see more and more, as Lee had indicated and Jeff indicated, more and more ransomware attacks. We're going to see more and more phishing attacks. These vulnerabilities are here, and they're just waiting for the right time to take advantage of our organizations. And so if we think 6 to 9 months down the line we're out of this, we're not. We may be hopefully out of the virus situation, but there's going to be a prolonged exposure to our organizations as a result of what we have gone through and what we're currently going through.
Yeah, no, great point. It's really a continuation of what we've been seeing for years. It's just keeps getting to new levels. So Lee.
That's right.
So I think there are a few things we need to be thinking about. One is, as we've talked about, the Office for Civil Rights and the fact that they really lessened their enforcement for telehealth and other aspects. Organizations may have, again, lessened their own internal controls as a result. So I think we're going to need to, one, kind of go back, and organizations are going to need to reassess 6 to 9, 12 months where they are, and OCR will go back to their enforcement. So organizations are going to need to be able to go back and tighten up their overall capabilities that they may have lessened during this period. So that's one. I think the whole aspect, as well as we start to talk about, even the FDA on medical devices, I think we need to not lose sight of the medical device side of this as well, and the fact that there may have been a lessening as well of controls around medical device manufacturers. I mean, we're talking about ventilators, we're talking about all these various devices. Yeah, we were under a major impact to be able to get ventilators and medical devices as quickly as possible into hospital environments for ICUs. Well, I think we probably lessened some of the controls around some of those as well. So I think that's another aspect that we're going to have to look at over the next 6, 9, 12 months in relation to going back at and making sure that we've not lessened the rigor around medical devices as well. And then the third thing is really around, we've talked about interoperability. There's a lot going on regarding interoperability these days. Whether or not it's TEFCA, 21st Century Cures, Office of National Coordinator's got a lot going on as far as what they're doing. The promulgation of FHIR for application program interfaces. All of this is proceeding as far as ONC is concerned. So the whole aspect around privacy and security and organizations looking at their infrastructure around their rigor on interoperability and how they're dealing with interoperability between various devices and interfaces is going to be extremely important as well. So those are areas I think that are continue to be critical. And I'm going to just mention again, I'll get on the same soapbox as Mike on third-party assurance to assure that we've got that third-party assurance and we continue to increase third-party assurance rigor. If you've let your foot off the pedal to some degree on third-party assurance, that needs to be there going forward 6, 9, 12 months.
All right, no, thank you, Lee. And now, Jeff, you get to bring us home.
Sure. So I'll echo everything that Michael and Lee have said. Look, we know that there have been relaxations in security posture. Security is inherently inconvenient. Reasserting that discipline is going to be a challenge, and we need to make sure that as we get back into that appropriate posture, if your organization has had to relax it, know that this is going to be harder than it was to impose the first time because people have kind of relaxed away from it, and there will be a form of either passive or active resistance because it is a challenge. But I'm going to signal, I think, a positive note here. I think that one of the things that we will come out of this with, if I look 6, 9, 12 months out, is recognizing places where we can effectively and safely streamline things and optimize for outcomes. I think that's going to be a positive result of this whole experience that we've gone through. And I think that if I can underscore the third-party assessor point yet again, even for organizations that have done a lot of self-assessment, I think when you come back from a place where you have pragmatically relaxed your restrictions, getting a third, party's view, getting that second pair of eyes on your policies and your practices is going to be especially helpful, because you may have developed a bit of a blind spot to the things that you've done because you've lived with them for a number of months now, and having somebody else come in and say, wait a minute, that thing that you did there, that's not, apple pie. And so I think that's useful to get that extra pair of eyes and to help you reassert your posture. But I think, to that positive note I sounded, I'm hoping we come out of this saying there are certain things that we found were not that risky, certain approaches, certain techniques, certain tools that have allowed us to remain safe while being more effective and quick to respond and doing things that ultimately what all of these relaxations have been about, which is trying to improve patient outcomes in a really critical, timelines that we're facing right now. So I'm hoping that is one positive that comes out of all of this, along with all of the risk that we've taken on.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm very happy that you're able to help us end on a positive note. But, I definitely think there's a lot of food for thought that all of you raised. And, thank you for joining the panel today. And also thank you to everyone listening. I think there's a lot for us to still observe, and obviously always room for progress. But, as we said, hopefully, there is that note of optimism in there, and we can find the silver linings in everything that has happened. So again, thank you everyone for participating and for listening today.
Matt, Jeffrey, Lee, Michael, thank you so much for your time. And of course, thank you to our attendees. A copy of this recording will be sent out in the next couple of days. Until our next event, everybody stay safe and healthy.